understand that. And as I give all of my educational counsel and advice to all these families, I always then come home and I try to do it at home. Never works. My 6-year-old always, throws the tantrum and says, Dad, like what you're trying to do really doesn't work. But I promise for the older kids, I think it does work. So it's only a matter of time for this one. So I'm really excited to get here, in front of you all today, share some knowledge about the ACT, SAT, and sort of that journey. And the Xanax, of the education world is knowledge. And so hopefully we can relieve a little bit of that anxiety and stress today, and provide a little knowledge by the end of the day.
Absolutely. Thank you. A little quick hit about what we do here. The College Coaches has been around for a long time, as I've mentioned. A few little quick pointers, and this is the only promo you're going to get. Everything else is hardcore information tonight. College Coaches, we do not do costly packages. Everything's a la carte so that you pay for what you need. A lot of people don't know what they need until they're actually in the process. We have all 5-star Google reviews, so I hope nobody's going to put a low review after tonight's presentation. All of our head coaches have a background in education. It's not a hobby or a second career for anybody. They're lifelong educators with tons of experience, 15 to 45 years per coach. And you can always get with us to do a free intro call. All right, how has the process changed? This is something that's pretty important to know. Nowadays, students apply to 8 to 12 schools, which is pretty wild. When I applied, it was maybe 3 to 4 schools. We all kind of thought our college counselor was a little bit strange. She worked in the basement. I'm obviously a little bit strange, but I'm not in a basement. So there's progress there, right? 8 to 12 schools so that you have good choices in the end. And the key to that list is balance. A couple likely schools, which is the new term for safety, a few reach schools or stretch schools, and then the rest in that target zone. Demonstrated interest, you may have heard of. That is a new phenomenon that colleges are doing, not all of them, typically medium to small liberal arts schools, but some larger schools do as well. They're checking to see, have you visited in person or virtually? Do you open their emails, if you can believe that? It's a little bit big brothery. Have you attended any fairs or local programming? You don't have to do all of these things, but you do need to show a little bit of love to the colleges that you're applying to. So you don't need to worry about this now. If you're a senior, it's time to get in the groove, but the rest of you just kind of be aware of it. Selectivity has also changed dramatically. When you were growing up, schools that might have been considered a safety school, and remember now we say likely school, they now have pretty wild acceptance rates. And I'm not saying that Northeastern and University of Maryland were safety schools back then, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot of their acceptance rates from the last cycle, which were pretty wild. But as you can see, one thing remains the same. Parents still annoy their children during the process. So we're good for something, right? Starting the college search, you can see this photo, this cartoon rather. This dad is reading the rankings to his cherub, and look at the kid's eyes. Okay, the kid is just trying to chill. This cartoon is meant to tell us all to just take a step back, let the kids be kids. The process is going to be there when they're ready for it. Now, of course, some of you may have seniors, and you're thinking, I can't wait any longer. My kid's a senior. We got to get in the groove. That is correct, but there are ways to do it, and that's something that we can help with too. Okay, more about the changing landscape. You've heard, college admissions has been in the news, I would say ad nauseum, which is a very fancy Latin term. I hope you guys are impressed, for a long time. So here's what colleges are looking for now. Academic rigor. What does rigor mean? Is your student taking classes in advanced or honors where appropriate and if offered? So if your high school doesn't offer AP or honors classes, that doesn't mean that you're going to be at a disadvantage. The colleges will read your transcript in the context of your school. They know which schools don't give grades, do give grades, have APs, don't have APs. But they're looking to see if you're really interested in English. Are you pushing yourself in that area, taking the higher level classes or what's considered higher level at your school? It does not mean you need to stuff the curriculum every year overflowing with APs. There's no reason in the world I should ever be in AP calculus. You don't want me near money. I shouldn't be in AP science. You don't want me near any kind of labs or anything like that, right? I'm an English gal. So follow your students' lead on what they're interested in. Rec letters remain an important part of the process from your teachers and your school college counselor as well. The ability to write, that's something that remains important. They want to know, can you do the work in college? They'll see that through the essay and supplements. And are you involved outside of the campus? Colleges expect the students to get involved. They're not going to, the reps aren't going to run for VP of the class or run the dunk for the charity event on the weekend. They want you guys to get involved. So have you been able to balance academics with extracurriculars? And then we talked about demonstrated interest. This sounds very, very sophisticated, what I'm about to say. So I hope you're ready. You can literally Google, does X college calculate demonstrated interest? Okay. And as long as it brings you to that college's webpage, they're very transparent about it. And you can find that out. Test scores, I don't want to steal Alex's thunder. He will be talking about that. But as many of you know, the landscape currently is test optional is a thing. It's here to stay. There are many schools that are just either test optional, you can submit it or not, or test blind, saying we're not even going to look at that. We won't get too far into the jargon, but I just kind of wanted you to have a sense of what's out there. Okay, will my kid get anywhere? That's really what you all want to know, right? The answer is yes, with a little caveat here. You must have a balanced list, which we talked about. When you hear, and I don't know where you're calling in from, but if you're in the DMV, the District, Maryland, Virginia area, there's a lot of noise about the process, and it's understandable. People are nervous about it. They're talking about it, but you'll often hear, well, Sally or Jamal or Henry did not get in anywhere. I can't believe it. He had 4.0, Well, nobody knows where that person applied, right? Some students have a list that are all reaches. So it's about balance, okay? Your kid will get in places. I used to tell my students, look, no one's hiding under my desk from last year. Everybody's gone to college, and college counseling is kind of in my job title. So you're going. Scattergrams in your schools can help you kind of gauge what is a target likely or reach. But keep in mind that those limit your student to two numbers, a GPA and a test score, if they're using it. So it's just one piece of the puzzle, but it does give a sense of how students from your high school are reading at the colleges. And I hope everybody is reading my memes, okay? The memes are just as important as what I'm saying. Okay, so, let's check on those memes. Here's some more for you in case I didn't make my point clear. The best antidote for stress is action, making a plan. So one of the things that I see that causes most anxiety in the process is when families start very late. We can help you wherever you are in the process, but it's great to have a sense of what to do when. So without further ado, we will get into that. First of all, I suggest you begin slowly. If you steamroll your team and say, we're talking about college, say, get fired up, let's do this. You're going to get answers like, fine, I don't know, whatever, okay? And that's not going to help, right? That's going to drive you crazy, and they're not getting anything out of it either. Their stress level will go up, and so will yours. So now nobody's happy in the family, not even the dog, okay? Instead, check to see if your teen is emotionally available. That's my expression for saying, can your teen take this on right now? If you said to your son or daughter, hey, we're going to talk about college on Thursday, would they say, I cannot put anything else on my plate right now. I have ring day, I have prom, I have blah, 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 blah. Or yes, let's do that. I'm worried about the process, and let's do it. Okay, so check in to see how they're doing. 8th grade seems crazy to have this on the slide, but give me a second. Look what the slide says. You'll see there's no word on this about talk about college, right? Grade 8 is more about finding your locker, right, than finding your future. It should be on friends, learning how to study, managing your time, and being a kid. You're still a kid in 8th grade. Okay, so this is not where we talk about college, but I put it in the presentation purposefully so that parents know to just let kids be kids and there'll be time. Okay, so I am now going to pass it along to my colleague Becky, who will do a brief introduction of herself, and then she'll take you into the high school years. She is much more mature than I am in terms of, emotional maturity,
That's
not
true.
age. So
That's true.
more qualified for the high school age.
Oh, that's a hard act to follow. Hello, I'm Becky Bowlby. I have many years in both college admissions and college counseling. And I am not from the DMV area. I'm from outside of Philadelphia. My most recent position was at Lower Merion High School, which is right outside of Philadelphia and the home of Kobe Bryant. So now that you've made that transition to high school, there are a lot of things to do and to choose from, both with classes and extracurricular activities. So what you want to do is check out extracurricular activities that you like or are curious about. Don't think about the activities you choose in terms of what looks good for colleges. Commitment rather than number is really important. You don't need a big number of activities to be involved with, but rather devote yourself to a few and do them well and get really involved with those. Really, the focus in ninth grade is on learning and grades and activities, as I mentioned, because this is your first year of your high school transcript and starting in GPA. Next slide, please. So summers are really important as we are leaving summer and going back into school for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's a break from school. But second, it gives you the chance to do things you're interested in, like volunteering. Pick an organization that you really have an interest in. And that's very important because I think volunteering to just volunteer, that's going to be pretty meaningless for you and for the people that you're working with. So volunteer, find an organization that you really like and you feel strongly about and offer your services. That'll be much more meaningful all around. Find internships. Those can be paid or unpaid in an area you'd like to learn more about. Maybe you're considering some particular career and you know somebody who you could shadow, who has a career that you're interested in pursuing. Why not check that out and do that part of the summer as well? Maybe take a class. Doesn't have to be for credit, but check out what the local colleges might have to offer. And how about teaching yourself something new? Maybe you don't have time during the school year to do something like baking. If you like to bake or you like to cook, if you're interested in taking up art or ceramics, and well, that is art, but a form of art, music, something like that. Now's the time to really explore some of your interests. Next slide, please.
Sorry, it's giving me a hard time. There we go.
It's okay, no worries. Okay, so 10th grade. This is the first year. I love the minions. Love the minions. This is the first year of standardized testing. You will take the PSAT in mid-October in your school. So see that P in PSAT? That stands for practice, which is exactly what it is. It's a practice test. The most important thing to think about during 10th grade is courses that you might want to register for in 11th and 12th grades. And you want to think about those courses, the major subjects first, and build on those. You want to consider the rigors. Kathleen mentioned a little bit earlier, rigor is important, but you don't want to overwhelm yourself. So you want to have that balance too. So map out your subjects, your major subjects first, but don't leave out those electives that maybe you've always wanted to take. I think having a plan for those last 2 years can take a lot of the stress out of this whole process. And if you're traveling over the summer or on breaks or whatever, and you go someplace and there's a college nearby, why not check it out? That might tell you if that's the right type of school for you. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Barbara. Barbara, take it away.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Barbara Hancock. I am a native of the DC area, like Alex. I graduated from National Cathedral School And after I finished my master's degree at Georgetown University, I built my career in the DMV, working at a number of independent schools, most recently at the Potomac School in McLean. And I have 2 children, the older of whom attends Fairfax County Public Schools. I was also an admission reader for Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, so not too far from Becky's neck of the woods. And so I've been able to see both sides of the process. So 11th grade is where we really start to get into gear with beginning to think about schools that could be a good fit, beginning to formulate a plan for standardized testing. Most students are going to take either the SAT or the ACT and choose a test and take it twice, sometimes 3 times. We recommend planning for that and then seeing how your list develops, which schools you end up choosing, and how your test scores turn out, and how those are in relation to your high school grades, because most schools are still test optional, not all, and we'll see how that shifts. The pandemic obviously brought on the test optional movement, but we have tailored conversations with students all the time as to whether their test scores are going to be to their benefit or not. Academics are always the first and foremost thing that a college is going to look at. And when you hear the all importance of junior year and how that gets sort of drummed up, that's because that's the most recent full year that colleges are going to see when they look at your high school transcript. They'll see what you're taking senior year, and that certainly matters. But the junior year grades are the last full set of grades that they have. So there's a lot of balls that need to be kept in the air during junior year. As students continue to, dive into their extracurriculars, maybe get some more leadership in certain areas, and add into the process, carving out some time to visit colleges that will be appropriate, and to make sure they're building a good rapport with their teachers so that they have a few people ready to, support them. Many colleges are asking for 1 or 2 teacher recommendations, and even if they're not requiring it, it can be an added component that's optional that will sometimes work in a student's favor. Next slide. Okay, the summer before senior year. So as Becky had said, there are a number of great things to do over the summer to be productive, to deepen an interest, to earn some money, or have an impact. Rising seniors should also be thinking about using some time over that summer to get their ducks in a row with their college applications. That's kind of an additional purpose, because it really does save stress later. The senior year fall goes by very, very fast. Suddenly it's homecoming, and we're 2 weeks away from application deadlines. November 1st is a very common deadline for early action or early decision, and that's often a key part of the strategy of filing some applications in that early wave, and we talk through that with each of our students and families. So over the summer, completing the common application and the main essay that goes along with that, which is up to 650 words, is going to be a to-do item for just about every student. There's a lot of choice in what they can write about for that essay. And in addition, many colleges are going to have additional essays, supplemental essays that they have decided to ask and that are going to be a part of their review process. We suggest keeping track of what those potential topics are for the supplements for different schools, because sometimes they can overlap, and you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone if you're organized and if you're lucky. So I think that the essay is a really fun part of the process, actually, once you get going with it. Maybe I think that because I used to be an English teacher along with several other members of the college coaches, but you want to encourage your student to go into this with some confidence, because everyone has something unique about themselves and can tell a story about it. So we don't have to magnify it to this complete make or break thing, because most students can do just fine and write something that they end up being proud of. Next slide. Thank you. So just diving a little bit more into the essay, the best essays are on topics where students feel inspired. They genuinely care about it, and they're able to be authentic and to share a piece of their story. We are very well versed in helping students present themselves. while also supporting them as they own the process. This is their writing. Parents can be supportive to a point. I think sometimes brainstorming topics is a really great way that parents can help. When it comes to giving feedback, though, it's important that the student hears some feedback from someone outside the family, from a third party, whether that's a counselor, a teacher who has a lot of experience reading college essays. It just lands differently, and sometimes as a parent you may be too close to the topic, and certainly you want to keep your relationship good with your student so they can hear critical constructive feedback from somebody else. We are I've done this for a number of years, have a number of brainstorming exercises that can be very effective in helping reluctant writers or people who feel a little bit stuck or a little bit daunted by this. And also, having those conversations, which can be difficult at times, of is this the right topic for the essay? For instance, if there have been bumps in the road during high school, it's often wise to address those somewhere in the application, but the personal essay is not always the best place for that. So there is an additional information section. There are other options of where you can address a struggle or a difficulty, but we talk through that with each student. And just as another piece of advice, do not rush through those supplemental essays. We really want the student to save time for those, because if the college took the time to ask those questions, you better believe they're going to zero in on the responses, and in some cases care about that even more than they do the main essay, which they expect students to polish and to spend time on. When I was working for Swarthmore, we had 3 supplemental essays that you could choose from. You only had to do one, and it was 250 words. So typically they are shorter than the main Common App essay, but colleges really just want to know you better through your essay. They do not want to read some narrated version of your resume, but they want to see, how do you think, how do you write, and can we get a sense of who you're going to be in our community?
Absolutely. Thanks, Barbara. And I just wanted to interject that a week from tonight, same time, 7 p.m., we are doing a webinar on the college essay. So people are welcome to join us.
Great. All right. So we've seen a number of college campuses collectively. I've probably seen about 100 myself. And only a few of those were when I was going through it as an applicant. Most have been much more recently. And we do have some advice that tends to work pretty well. As you can see here, one thing that I really think is important is for the student to be able to have the first opportunity to speak after a tour and kind of start the debrief process in the car ride, maybe if you're on a road trip. And sometimes it's fun to compare and have different perspectives, which can be gained if the parent goes on a tour with one tour guide and the student takes a different tour. And also that can sort of offset if one tour guide is having an off day or is a little bit flat, or if one person's interests resonate more with your students' interests. You want to make sure you save the time on the visit to really do it right, and that you're keeping notes and taking some pictures, and that the schools are not all going to blur together. You also want the admission office to know that you were there. As Kathleen had mentioned, demonstrated interest. Visiting campus is one of the ways that they can measure that, certainly not the only way. But if you're there, you want to get credit for that. Usually an admission officer will lead a session, an info session, and then there's a tour that follows. That person might or might not be the person who's reading the applications and overseeing our region. But sometimes you can go in the admission office, and if it's a slow day over the summer or something, maybe you can actually say hello to the person that does cover the region if they weren't your presenter. You can pick up a copy of the student newspaper. If it's a nice day, you might see a lot of happenings on the quad and student activities bustling. But if it's the dead of winter, the bulletin board in the student center might also be a great resource to know what's coming up. Are there particular student groups that are putting on events over the weekend, a cultural activity, getting together for a meal, things like that. So lots of ways to, excuse me, sort of get to know the campus once you're there, beyond just the info session and the tour. And the next slide will go into this a little bit more. Okay, I recommend strongly that you keep the number of tours per day to 2 campus visits. Running to a third one, I've tried that. You're just going to be running around like a chicken with your head cut off. You're really going to need that caffeine in the coffee, and you might not even have a chance to stop at the coffee shop. But making sure that you see what is most important to you on the visit. If you're a recruited or a prospective athlete, maybe you haven't been recruited by a coach, but you want to see the gym or try to make contact in advance with a coach. If you happen to know somebody who attends that school, a friend who had already graduated from your high school, those of you that have older siblings can maybe also mine that resource even a little bit more of where your older son or daughter's friends have kind of fanned out on different campuses. And I find that getting the cup of coffee in the student center is great, but making contact with an acquaintance or someone who's able to kind of sit down and give you the candid talk and really let you ask your questions can be really even better. I love seeing campus libraries, and some of them are really beautiful. I think Vassar is probably one of my favorites. But it's also interesting to see who's in the library. If it's a Friday afternoon or a Saturday, is the library full or is it empty? What is the workload like? I think, getting a sense of the academic vibe and the academic expectations needs to be a crucial part of any tour that you're on. So I highly encourage you to, plan your tours, plan them well, and just be strategic. That, I call it the Goldilocks approach. You want to, if possible, expose the student to a little bit of everything. Try to see a school that's small, large, in the middle. Try it on for size and kind of see what works. And it is an iterative process, building a list. We always take the feedback that someone gives us from the tours they've already been on in order to make recommendations of what else they might like. Right. So next slide. Okay, this is a fun one. If you've done everything well and helped your student find that great fit, they will be off and grown and flown, and it will be very different from sort of shoving them on the school bus when they were in kindergarten. They'll be on the way to finding their path, and although that is an emotional process and a lot of change in itself, it's really rewarding as well. And I think that's why all of us stay in this field. So I'm going to pass it to Alex now.
All right, well, thank you, Kathleen and Becky and Barbara. I get the joy of hearing you guys quite often, but it's so, to me, listening to that and all the things, the demonstrated interest, even being in an adjacent field, there are so many pieces of the college admissions process once you get past my part and you're doing the actual applications that, it's so arcane, and it's incredible the knowledge that you guys bring. So thank you all. I just wanted to also let everybody know who's sort of out there watching, as you have questions along the way, you can put them in the chat box. And at the end of the webinar here, we'll do a Q&A, turn the recording off, and we'll go through those questions and try to go from the most general questions to the most specific questions, and allow to try to get the most sort of questions answered that we can that apply to the most people, and then try to continue down the line. And so if you have a specific question that's a little bit more particular, if you wait around, I promise you we'll try to get to it. So a little bit about us and my company. I started it, like I said before, in 2004, and for a long time we've been doing these 3 different types of education: test preparation, of course, that's why we're called Top Score, but also academic tutoring and support. To me, it's so important. All the things that, of course, are before the test, that strengthen the skills that actually show up on the exam, are things that I'm passionate about, that we are. And so we love helping students with whether it's math or English or science. And we bring a lot of the same approach in terms of the way that we help students really plan and then execute. And that planning part of it is so important, and building the right routines. And so if you're just helping a student, band-aid their math grade, you're only helping them for a week. Whereas if you can help them change the routines and understand when to go to their teacher for help, when to work with, a peer, how to build a better math student, that's sort of what we really try to do in our academic tutoring. And then in our skills-based learning, these are programs that we began when I looked at the things that it's really hard to learn in school, whether it's how to be a better writer, or it's about how to be a better leader, or about how to become a more confident speaker, how to take on projects and plan and execute. Their skills-based learning programs came out of that. And I think that that's such a valuable sort of support that you can provide outside of school, and such valuable lessons that are going to carry you through the harder courses of high school, through college, and beyond. I've been doing it 18 years, and over that time period, I've gained a lot of knowledge, a lot of sort of planning knowledge, so that I know when a student's entering 8th grade versus 9th versus 10th, what are the things that they want to be thinking about? What are the curriculum decisions they need to make? And so we try to provide that sort of free to parents when they call in. And then, a student may not need us at a particular time, but hopefully through that advice and counseling, we can be an advocate and a partner to a family for, over the long haul. And then at some point along the way, if a student needs support, certainly we're there to provide it. All of our programming is bespoke. The joy of being a small company is that we have the flexibility and bandwidth to be able to try to create programs that are unique to each individual student. And the tutors who do so are not only highly qualified, of course, but they have to be interesting. If you can't build a rapport with a student, if your voice is this, and you can't imagine how many STEM guys I've interviewed for math and science positions. I mean, they're like literally human dopamine. And if you put them with the student trying to go through something that is boring for that student intrinsically, you're not going to have a very inspired kid. So obviously a big part of what we do in our hiring process is find people who are going to really try to make that connection with the student. And that's part of our motto, which is deep learning through deep relationships. And the deep learning part, of course, is trying to go beneath tips and tricks and band-aids and things, whether it's in test prep or academic tutoring, and trying to get to the core of what learning is and help share what we love about learning with students who may have a little bit more trouble making that connection to their academic life, and trying to help them build the right routines to make it easier for them and achieve the success. So that's what we do. So now to get to the SAT, ACT, what you all are so excited to hear. I know so many of you, when you were 18, you felt like you were leaving this all behind you, and we're very excited to do so. And now I'm bringing it all back to you, so you're welcome. The standard, basic things, I think, a lot of you probably know a little bit about the ACT and SAT, that there are these 3 to 3.5 hour tests. The new digital SAT is coming out in March of 2024, and I'm going to get to some of those details about that later. I'm sure some of you are curious about that. As far as colleges accepting the ACT and SAT exams and whether they prefer one or the other, all colleges that are not test blind, all colleges that are either test optional or test required, they do accept both. There's no bias for one or the other. There, used to be sort of the Northeast schools want the SAT and maybe Midwest wants the ACT, but there's no truth to that anymore. Really, it's whatever your student is going to score higher in, that's what the schools are going to want to see. Already actually discussed before was about how many times a student should take the test. And we like to do generally 2 or 3 times. If you're a fantastic tester, you might knock it out in one shot. And you definitely want to avoid taking it 5, 6 times. There's a point at which you get diminishing returns, and also that poor kid, right? So 2 to 3 times is the right number. And we try to keep it to a 4 to 6 month period. Beyond that, you're just stretching it too far, and your student needs to be focusing on the more important parts of their life, their GPA, where they want to go to school, what's the right fit for them emotionally and psychologically, not trying to get 30 more points on a test. As far as registering, there's the links right here, but some of you may be far from that. So they're there, but they're pretty easy to Google too. So as far as the timeline goes, it used to be easier. Okay, it used to be easier because there were fewer choices. So traditionally, students would take it in the spring of junior year and then in the fall of senior year. That's when I did it in 1999. That's when I'm sure so many of you did it. You took it for the first time in the spring, you studied some over the summer, took it a second time in October, and that was it. Now, the reason that was the case was because of 2 M's, math and maturity, is that by that point of junior year, in spring of junior year, you likely will have seen all the math that you need to know for the exams. And also you have the maturity at that level to understand, okay, this college stuff feels real. So now I'm going to put the time and commitment towards this. Now, when students can test has changed, because the test is offered so much more today than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so it's offered in almost every month of the year except for January. So you really can have it your way and really pick your own test preparation timeline. That's a big part of what we do with students when they first come to us, is figuring out, all right, what math class are you in? What sports do you play? What season are you most free? When is the big, do you have a big spring musical? When is yearbook? You work on the things and figure out what is the best time for your student to take the test. And that's going to be a huge factor in when you prepare and when you take your exam, is when you have the actual time to do so. That's a really big part of it. Math is usually a second piece of it, because with the sort of extra offerings, it has sort of opened the door to students taking the test earlier and earlier. And we do have to be a little careful about that, because you want to make sure that your student has enough math under their belt to realistically, achieve what they want to on the exam. The SAT finishes up with Algebra 2. The ACT does include a decent amount of pre-calculus in terms of how much of the year could be tested. So high performers on advanced math tracks, a lot of them will choose to test on the earlier side because that math allows them to do that, and they may be able to take advantage of that summer between sophomore and junior year. But again, that's unique to students who are on that advanced math track. Other students may be much happier taking their test and doing their preparation in the winter of junior year between spring and fall sports seasons. Other students may want to get the benefit of that junior year, be a little bit more confident academically, and maybe finish up over the summer between junior and senior year. The real takeaway here is that there is no one perfect timeline for any student. And it generally takes looking at all the different options, talking to somebody like me, and figuring out what's going to be the best 4 to 5 months for my student to put some effort into this. I like to think of test preparation and taking the test as something like a varsity sport. It won't be as much of a time commitment as varsity sport, but if you carve that time out, then you'll know that you've created enough space to prepare for that exam without overloading and overwhelming your student. So for 3 varsity sports students, it does become a challenge for when to figure out how to take their test. And a lot of them may decide to prepare over one of those summers, or at least start over a summer for that exact reason. As far as the test optional movement, and there's obviously so much of this is still unsettled. So we really won't know for 2 or 3 years kind of what the end result of the pandemic's effect on testing was. And until all that data comes out, the schools themselves are not going to know, how they feel about it. The universities right now are starting to track the data from students who were let in during these test optional years to see, were they able to keep up? Were the students who provided test scores, were they more prepared for their classes? Did they have a higher, attrition rate from students who didn't, provide test scores? All of that is going to be worked out through the data, and schools will make decisions in the next couple of years. That doesn't help you right now, so you have to try to move ahead with the information that you have, which is that some schools are test required. Some schools have gone back to that, like Georgetown and MIT. They're in the minority. Some bigger state schools have done the same. Some schools have tried to do it and backed out under political pressure, like University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. They were going to go test required and then sort of backed off of that. However, again, if they were going to go required, it kind of tips a hand a little bit about what they might think about the value of test scores. So something to keep in mind. Some schools are test blind, test free, the University of California school system. And once they declare that, certainly other schools that are sort of the same mind philosophically will follow suit. And for them, if you got a perfect score, they don't care. They don't value the results of that test. They don't want to see them. And so those will always be, of course, an option for students who don't want to take the test. And then the big group in the middle is still test optional. And I think that group will shrink some over the next 3 to 4 years, but it's still going to be a sizable group, because what it's going to do, it's going to allow them to get these diamonds in the rough who are fantastic in every other way except for testing. And if they had to provide a test, they simply probably wouldn't apply to the school, and the school would miss out on those diamonds. And so I think for that reason, they're going to be incentivized to stay test. Most schools will stay incentivized to be test optional. And so what that brings to you as a parent and as a family is to determine what that means for your student. And so there's no one size fits all. In a few years, there'll be a little bit more data to help make these decisions. But for now, you kind of want to think about 3 buckets for your student. For your strong testers, if a student has, and I gave some numbers here that are by no means a hard line, but it's just to give you something to think about. If a student receives a 1200 score on a PSAT or an SAT diagnostic, or a 25 ACT score in a diagnostic, those are strong starting scores. And if the student's able to work hard and improve at those scores are going to be good to send somewhere. Somebody is going to want those scores. That's a student who should almost certainly prepare for and take their exams, because they're going to be able to provide scores that are high enough that it's meaningful for their application. On the other end sort of the pendulum there, if you have students who have very low sort of diagnostic scores, maybe below the national average numbers of a 1050 SAT or a 20 ACT score, but they have great GPAs and they have a great narrative. They are very passionate about some of their activities, and they've shown that through the consistency of their effort in some of those activities. My personal advice would be, unless they have a college that they're absolutely set on, if they're a little flexible in that regard, if it were my kid, I would say, you know what, if this testing is not for you, let's apply to test optional schools and throw that effort into something that's more meaningful to you, that's going to make you happy. I think that's going to shine on the application more than an 1100 that you had to scrap and scrape for. So that's the advice that I'm generally giving in today's world. Again, that might change as it becomes a little bit more apparent that schools more and more seem to be favoring the students who provide the test scores. But that's what I would do for my kid, from both the college acceptance point of view, as well as just their mental health and about what's teaching them what's important. As far as on the side here with Dr. Evil and Milli Vanilli, this is where it gets a little bit mucky, because there's a lot of people who are skeptical about when schools say they're test optional, whether what they really mean by that. And I think Milli and Vanilli would tell us that we have to believe them at their word. When they say test optional and you have a great application that fits that school, what that school's looking for in an applicant, you have to believe that they're going to consider your application with full open eyes, without a test score. Now, on the other hand, if you're sort of in that middle group, okay, where your score, maybe between 1,000 and 1,200, what's likely to happen is that you probably should prepare for your exams. You should take your exams, and then you'll probably send the scores to some schools and withhold from others. So for your reach schools, where the score of the average student, the middle 50th percentile, may be well above what your score was, that score is not going to help your application, so you'll probably withhold it. Whereas for some of your target schools, and certainly for your likely schools, you'll want to submit that score, because that will show that you're sort of within that middle body that they accept, or above what they generally accept as a student. And so that helps your application. So if that helps a little bit, strong testers with those numbers, 1,200 or higher, should definitely test. Below 1050, may want to really start considering going the optional route. And in between, you're probably going to want to prepare, but understand that your score is probably going to be used for some schools and not for others. And as you look at whether you want your student to, how much effort you want them to put into those test scores, you have to look at the rest of their application. And again, if they're a diamond in the rough, if they really stand out and jump off the page in other ways, the score is going to mean less. If they're a little bit more like other students, then they're going to need as much data that supports their qualifications for the school as possible. The ACT versus the SAT. So let's say your student does decide that that they're going to test. There's obviously some key differences here, but the number one difference is going to be the speed. And the way that you're going to help your student figure out if they work fast enough for the ACT, which is a much faster test, is to go ahead and do a diagnostic. If you can take a full test in each exam format, or if you don't have as much time and you take a hybrid exam that a lot of companies like mine will offer. The hybrid exam is half SAT, half ACT on the same day. So you can sort of compare the two head to head, and the student can come out feeling, okay, I felt much better on this side of the exam than the other. The diagnostic test, for many students, for about half of students, it's going to reveal very clearly which is the better test for the student. They're going to come out and say, I really like this one better. And the score comparison will bear that out. And the other half of students, you've got to go a little bit digging deeper into the differences between the exams, and a little difference, look into your student psyche and personality a little bit to figure out which test might hold the higher ceiling for my kid. The ACT is a faster exam. So students who are strong, definitive decision makers are going to have an advantage on the ACT. Whereas students who are a little bit more thoughtful, they read a little bit more slowly, they want to read the question twice. For those students, that ACT is always going to add an extra layer of stress. And so the SAT might be the better long-term option. The math is a consideration. The math on the ACT is more advanced. But here's the thing. A lot of students will say, oh, I'm going to do the SAT because the math is less advanced. But on the SAT, the math is half of your exam score. On the ACT, it's a quarter of your exam score. So if your student is, let's say, is not great, let's say the math is the harder part for them of standardized testing, that's a tough year, between a rock and a hard place, because on the ACT, the math is more advanced, but on the SAT, it's a larger portion of your final score. So you can't just say, oh, I'm good at math, so I'm doing this test, or I'm bad at math, so I'm doing that test. It doesn't work like that. And that's why it can sometimes be hard to make that decision. But doing the diagnostic testing, getting the data, getting the numbers is the best way, the best starting point to think about which test is going to be better for you. And from a personality standpoint, after doing this for almost 20 years, I do see certain students tend to fall in one camp or the other. The ACT is a little bit more of a patterned test, meaning that test after test, the similarities hold a little bit more true, and the answers are a little bit more objectively proven from the evidence, so that if your steps and your processes are consistent and they're great, there's a little bit more room for growth in the ACT. Whereas on the SAT, it's a little bit more intuitive, a little bit more based on what you've read in the past versus your preparation for that particular test day. And so I do find that my students who are willing to put a lot of time in and prepare really hard might have a higher ceiling on that ACT, whereas a student, like the smart slacker, a student who we know from the beginning is probably not going to be super committed to this, is not the kind of kid who really highlights a lot in their science textbook. For that student, that SAT might be the better test, because they're going to be able to take advantage of maybe some of their intuitive intelligence, and they're not going to get the advantage of the ACT's patterns if they're not going to put the work in. So when I get a parent, if the scores are pretty even in the diagnostic testing, and my parent tells me, oh, my kid's kind of procrastinator, he's probably not the hardest worker, then that SAT usually starts to feel better for me, because I think they just might not put the work into the ACT to really squeeze everything they can out of their potential and their ability. So the digital SAT, it's coming. I hate it, but it's coming. I can't be like the guy shaking his fist in the wind. So it'll be here next fall for the PSAT. So for parents who have their kids going into their sophomore, junior year, next year in 2023, they'll be taking the new digital PSAT, and then the first digital SAT domestically will come out in March of 2024. What are some of the changes? It's going to be a shorter test, and it's on a screen. It's going to be on their computer screen at school. The math is going to be a little less wordy. They took away the section that has no calculator, so you'll have a calculator for the whole test, just like you do on the ACT. A big change is that the verbal passages will go from being 6-7 paragraphs long to being 1 paragraph long with 1 question per passage. And they're giving even a little bit more time per question. And so when you look at this, you see a lot of the changes are, you can say pandering, or you could say are trying to help students with some of the issues that they have with standardized testing. Obviously, these test changes surveyed very well with high school students who preferred taking it on computer than on paper, who liked a 2-hour test better than a 3-hour test, liked having a calculator versus not having a calculator, liked 1 paragraph passages versus 7 paragraph passages. Now, all of those same students would rather, learn about history from TikTok dances, but at the same time, this is the way the SAT has moved. Most of it is a lot of it is public relations stuff, but these are the changes that are occurring, and it's going to be important for you as a parent to help your student make in their decision making of ACT versus SAT to consider the impact of this changing digital exam. On the back end, in terms of scoring, the section adaptive part of this is going to be there. That's a little ad that's part of why it was digitized. This is more like nerdery than it is really important for students and parents to know. But the way the section adaptive will work will be that if you take the first half of your math section, will be easier questions. Depending on how you do on those, you'll get different math sort of second halves of your section. And so if you did really well on the first half, you'll get harder questions. If you did poorly on the first half, you'll get easier questions. And the easier path will have easier questions, but it restricts how high your score can go. So to get the highest possible score, you have to do well on those easy questions. It puts you into the harder path, and then you do well on those hard questions to achieve the highest possible scores. The purpose of this is to ensure, a student from Thomas Jefferson who's MIT bound probably shouldn't be taking the same 20 math questions as a student who's sort of up in the air whether he wants to go to college or not. And so that's what section adaptive is trying to do. It's trying to create more permutations to allow students to really show, no, I'm not an MIT kid, but when you give me sort of easier and medium questions that I can handle, I'm meticulous, I can show what I can do with the basic fundamental things that I've learned at school. So in that way, I do like what the SAT can do in the digital exam. Doesn't have that much impact on which test you choose, but I thought I would share. Some of the reading writing skills are going to be the same. It's mostly the format that's changed, and then the 1600 scale will remain the same. They made the change because it's easier to take and administer for the SAT, and it's easier to take for students. They can take it at school right on a computer, and it's a better fit for today's students, which again speaks to what I said before about all the surveys they did and the pretty predictable results of what kids would rather do. Talked about when this is coming out. Practice materials will be available in the coming months, so the students will have time to look at those materials and make a decision on what they want to do, down the line in spring of 2024. The ACT is already digital abroad already internationally, and so I think they'll follow suit eventually. We just don't know whether it'll be 2 years or 4 years. And then actual advice for rising 10th graders who are going to be the guinea pigs that following year. As you get closer to that time period, there will be a lot more information to help make an informed decision. But at this point, just as when there was a new SAT in 2016, for students who are going to have the time to prepare and put the effort into it, you generally want to take the known test, which is going to be the ACT, where the patterns haven't changed in 20 years dramatically. So if you're going to prepare for the test that you can prepare better for, that has the patterns. If you have a student who knows they won't have very much time to prepare, that SAT is going to offer an interesting, because it's going to be harder to prepare for that new SAT because it's a new test. That offers them a test where everybody's going to be on the same plane as them. Nobody has the advantage of being able to put hours and hours into studying the patterns because those patterns simply won't exist. So that's the early advice that I'll have for my students, is that all things being equal, if you're going to have time to prepare, go for the ACT. If you don't, go for that new digital SAT. What's next? Focusing on academics, activities, mental health. High school is indeed a journey, and students, we want them to have fun. For the last couple of weeks here of August, to think about, what we have coming up in September with school starting. I always tell my students that who are entering sophomore and junior year, where math in particular, always feels to take a real jump in difficulty level. I tell them in those couple weeks before school, do whatever you can to prepare for that first 2 weeks of school mathematically. Your English skills are not going to drop off tremendously over the course of summer, but math rust is real. And I got a lot of trips to Europe in my early 20s on panicked phone calls from kids in turbo pre-calculus at Landon. In third week of September, my phone would ring every year from kids who came out of summer and really struggled in this honors class. And that's whether it's an AP class or a turbos class or just a standard class for a student who struggles in math. I always give my best advice to parents in the last couple of weeks of summer. I know it's a drag, kids don't want to do it, but whatever you can do to help them get mentally prepared for those first couple of weeks of math, going on Khan Academy, asking a teacher what are some things I can do to prepare for the first week. That's gold, and is going to help them stay out of that hole that they'll feel like they're digging out of the rest of the year. So that's always, parents say, what's one piece of advice for the last couple of weeks of summer? There it is. So begin to explore your colleges when convenient. I'm sorry, I'm stealing a little bit of Kathleen's thunder here. But I also sort of tell my kids, because I pick up my little tidbits from Kathleen and try to share them with my SAT kids when we're sitting there and they can't stand me talking about the quadratic formula for another 2 seconds. And so I need a break for them. And so I say, make sure, when you go to a school, write down all the things you liked or didn't like about that school, and then give those notes to Kathleen or to Becky or to Barbara, because they're going to be able to say, okay, yeah, so you won't like this, or this school either. This stuff that you liked, that's true about this, and this school that you never would have thought of. So even though all the notes might not make the most sense in the world to you as a student or you as a family, professionals like these 3 wonderful ladies are going to be able to take that and provide incredible information. So that's sort of my last piece there. Diagnostic testing in that ACT, SAT process, that's always the first step. You can always reach out to us. Our tests are always free in that regard. Come out and take an exam, and we'll give you a report and analysis on what looks like it might be the better test. And certainly connecting with Kathleen and Barbara and Becky is always a fantastic idea to help you create sort of your blueprint, for your students' admissions journey.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. That's how to win friends and influence people, encouraging summer math. I love it. I love it. I'm not sure if Aiden would have gone for that, but maybe coming from you, I don't know. All right, I'm going to stop screen share and we're going to move into the Q&A portion. Please feel free to put questions in the chat, and we will stop the recording portion of this to preserve people's privacy. And I will hand it over to Becky or Barbara, and they are going to start culling some questions for us.